Welcome to Disquisitiv, a weekly talk show and Wide Awake's activation. First and foremost, just want to remind everyone that yesterday, September 19th, was RBG Remembrance Day. So today we're going to be celebrating the legacy of an ancestor, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who imagined radical visions into reality. Her memory is a very big part of the revolution of the Wide Awakes, and we want to honor her today. But the Wide Awakes, for those of you who maybe are tuning in for the first time, are a band of abolitionist dreamers who believe in the power to radically reimagine the future through creative collaboration. We understand that life is not a finite game where there are winners and losers, but an infinite game where our goals are to keep playing and get as many people as possible to join in. We gather as a community to cultivate joy, claim our agency for the future, and strategize our next play in the infinite game. This week, we're going to be focusing on the 2032 wheat crisis. So scientists predict that the fungus that has been destroying wheat crops may decrease wheat yields by 60% or more, which will have global effects. So today we're going to be discussing how we as a community will respond to this crisis and support each other. I'm Michaela, the host of Disquisitiv. I use they, them pronouns. I am coming from the unceded territory of the Lenape and Canarsie peoples. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself first as we introduce our players. The question today is, if you were an animal, what would you be? I would be an otter because they hold hands when they swim, and I just think that that's really sweet. Baven?
I'm Baven, she, her. I would probably be, I guess, a leatherback turtle. They went extinct in the last few years, which is horribly sad. But turtles and tortoises are amazing animals. They, I feel like, are the embodiment of like memory, right? They just carry so much wisdom. So, yeah.
All right. Sada.
Sarah, she, her. I would definitely be a sloth in our ever accelerating world with the bullet trains and the automated vehicles and the 6G data.
I'm Ben. I'm still a guy, and I would be well, for a little bit of a shameless plug for my industry, cows are actually represent a very interesting interdependence between humans. They only exist as a domesticated beast, really, and they might even be endangered as we slowly move away from relying on them for their natural output of meat and milk. So I think that cows are very special. Also, in Buddhist culture, they're considered the last level before nirvana. So I'm going to go with the cow.
All right, I love it. These are our players. Welcome. I thought that we would start our conversation on the wheat crisis with Sage Moore's. She had a comment on it.
My fellow Americans, I, like many of you, am shocked and dismayed by the news of the wheat rust fungus that has devastated our crops. The impacts of this crisis will undoubtedly affect every single living person in the United States. Grocers, farmers, restaurateurs, customers, and workers alike will have their lives disrupted by the spikes in the cost of wheat. Instead of learning from the coffee crisis of 2028 and pushing for greater change and preparation, we've been pulling back from our climate commitments. Under my Planet First policy, addressing the global temperature rise will be our #1 priority. As your president, I will address this crisis while planning for future ones. We must step in and provide the necessary support for those affected by the wheat shortage. Scientists continue to discover new details about this fungus. We must remain diligent and prioritize our future. We cannot undo what has been done. All we can do is acknowledge where we have gone wrong and should have done better. Our future demands our accountability. For the sake of our people, I call on President Anderson to take bold and decisive action to address these concerns and ensure the well-being of the American people. Thank you. I'm Sage Moore, and I approve this message.
I wanted to start by just acknowledging how we're all feeling about this. I think I'm less worried about myself in this crisis and more worried about how poor communities who rely on wheat are going to be affected by this. I know that there are already kind of shortages in food banks that I've volunteered at before. So I'm working on some community organizing to make sure that people can still get the food that they need. Climate justice is racial justice. So I think that's really where I'm at, but I'm really curious to hear about how y'all are feeling.
The thing about this whole thing, other than my frustrations about it feeling like this cyclical, very preventable phenomenon that has happened many times, is there's a lot of really great alternatives, but unfortunately already I'm seeing the effects trickle over onto other grocery staple items that have been alternatives for a long time. Like people are clearly turning to rice flour and oat flour and almond flour, coconut flour, and quinoa is a huge one for me. And that is not available as readily as it has been even a couple of weeks ago. Like my most recent grocery order, I had to pivot a lot. So I was like, oh man, this is already, the ripple effect of this is already becoming apparent. So, but the panic buying that's a hard one to deal with. So I worry, again, like you were saying, Michaela, for more vulnerable populations, for sure, because of the hoarding mentality, the panic buying in context to the wheat crisis. As far as an alternative, green banana flour, and I'm vegan, so I don't partake in cricket flour, but it is an excellent source of protein. So hopefully those things will be more accessible to people. And yeah, so I worry about accessibility, but I think there's a lot of alternatives. So I'm excited for the potential of that.
I'm not sure that folks here on Disquisitiv are as wide awake as perhaps they should be. I think we should all be a lot more concerned. I mean, right now, it's not reared its ugly head in full. I think right now what we're seeing is the effects of panic buying, but we're not going to see the true effects for months or even years for when we actually see the lack of feed grain and how it affects our livestock. I mean, I, for one, I'm gladly on our end that I'm glad that we've already begun to, in my business, transition to cultured meats. Because besides the climate benefits of not needing to maintain herds of livestock under normal circumstances, cultured meat would also eliminate the need for acres of grain that are normally used to feed our herds of cattle.
Thank you for explaining that, Ben, because I've been very skeptical of lab meat. I've leaned into, more plant-based alternatives, but knowing the harmful effects of animal agriculture on our planet, I hope this can create a positive change in meat production. We haven't had a strategic wheat reserve since 2008, which is when I was born. And that just baffles me. It's just a lack of foresight that I just don't understand. We're dealing with a lot of panic buying now, as people have been mentioning. When my grocery drone came yesterday, and half my order was missing because I think people are just trying to stock up, which I can't do because I live in a city. I want to see the government step into creating a system that rations and distributes the wheat so that it's all available equitably, because we can't afford for price gouging to turn bread into a luxury item. We simply cannot. I know that Anderson's number one concern right now is the economy, but surprise, surprise, that'll likely be what happens is bread becoming a luxury item. And I'm really, it scares me. It scares me a lot. I'm really fearful for Black and Brown communities who will be affected by these issues, that they're not going to get basic staples to eat. And this is why what is called intersectional environmentalism is so important. Like I said earlier, climate justice is racial justice, and this will affect all of us, but the effects are not going to be evenly distributed. And so, we're all in the same storm here, but not in the same boat.
They're predicting that 60% of crops, if they're destroyed, and if the U.S. exports 50% of those 60%, then I'm scared that they're gonna eliminate exports altogether. And I mean, that would be a difficult transition, and it would definitely have a major impact on the whole world. When the Beirut explosion happened in 2020, I was 16, and we went through a similar food crisis back at the time. And because, the port was destroyed and there was a depreciation of the currency, so people didn't have access, and most of the food was imported to Lebanon. So people had to come up with alternative ways to find some self-sufficiency. And so even if there weren't any green spaces back at the time in Beirut, there was some community gardens, like whatever, like parking lots or rooftops were turned into green spaces, and the conversation about agricultural practices started becoming more popular against like my generation, which was like unseen before that. It changes the relationship to food when you are growing something, and the smell of it, and also like it becomes like your baby, where you're like, you know that you can't like rush the process, but it's like it takes a lot of care and listening and learning about these different practices. So it was, I don't know, maybe that will also bring the conversation amongst, younger people to find such ways to become self-sufficient to a certain extent, I guess. I don't know.
Sada, just to like piggyback on what you're just saying, like the idea of returning to what you said, something about like our relationship to the land and our relationship to food. I'm not suggesting everyone becomes a farmer, but everyone being able to have at least some amount of like skills that where you could provide for yourself, where you understand how to tend a small garden, like community gardens, and like vertical gardens on people's balconies in the city. Like that is totally viable.
It sounds great going back to the land, like Sarah's talking about, but that's not the answer. We were hunter-gatherers, we were agrarian culture, and then we started developing the Bronze Age. We're in the information age. We're not, it sounds great, but would that have helped Americans avoid this blight? I don't think so. Having a small farm, people getting back to the land, and then what would they do about their jobs, about the people that have jobs? How does that? I think it's naive to
definitely not. It's definitely not an answer for like long term, but in times of like crisis and emergencies, like I remember that it was very useful for us that like we were through these community gardens that we were able to feed like whole neighborhoods, and whatever excess food, it was like put out on the curb for anyone to grab whatever they wanted. And I think that was kind of a solution for times of emergency.
I think honestly the problem here is like the fundamental issue of all of our food. We are so reliant on a very select few, like small number of providers, and when something goes wrong, all of a sudden, bim bam boom, we lose 60% of our wheat. Like, that is not a system that has ever been successful for an extended period of time. Therefore, it's not sustainable. And I mean, on this, the more on that, like what we're doing to the land. I know maybe it sounds like a little too out there or something, but what we are doing to our soil is problematic. It's creating problems over time. And now I'm not a farmer. I'm not, I don't claim to have a deep, intimate working knowledge of these things, but I mean, monoculture is depleting our soil.
Yeah, I think that we actually agree that a big change needs to occur. I think that we probably disagree on how to implement it. Having been in this industry for generations and seeing it change, I know that, and I understand what you're saying about having one large centralized crop that's controlled, but I think that you're not fully aware of all the tech that's currently available. I mean, what was this tech implemented, and had we had subsidies and certain kinds of government regulation, we wouldn't have encountered this problem. I don't think that subdividing and breaking up our crop is the answer. I think that implementing and investing in new tech and AI is the future, and a way to prevent this wheat blight that we're encountering right now.
Maybe like a combination of both, like old ways with new technology can be a good balance. That, yeah, I mean, and our main focus should really be about solutions for climate change and really focusing on that, because definitely the wheat crisis that we're going through today is because of mostly is because of the climate change.
So we could talk about this crisis probably all day. There is a lot of stuff that we can continue to talk about, but I want to talk about our next play in the infinite game. Now we're to talk about the playbook. What does everybody want to contribute? For all of you who are watching, we want your help. We invite you to be a part of this playbook with us. In our weekly newsletter, which goes out every Monday, we're going to be sharing more information about how you can contribute to the Week Crisis Playbook. Make sure you're sharing your opinions on social media, engaging with us on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. You know, we're all in this together, and we're going to continue to be all in this together creatively and collectively. So be sure to sign up for the newsletter on our website. We'll link it in the chat. And we'll also link all of our socials so you can tag us and have your input featured at the top of the show next week. We want to hear from all of you.